We begin tonight with a federal judge ordering the release of a redacted version of the affidavit used in the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago. Now, according to the order, the document must be unsealed by noon Friday. The Department of Justice submitted the redactions for review earlier today. In the order, U.S. Magistrate Judge Bruce Reinhardt said the government, quote, met its burden of showing that its proposed redactions are narrowly tailored to serve the government's legitimate interest in the integrity of the ongoing investigation. The government has argued that this document should remain sealed. Meanwhile, media organizations, including CBS News, have pushed for its public release. For more on this, Robert Costa joins us now. Robert is CBS News' chief election and campaign correspondent. Robert, so I like to help the audience at a time like this because it doesn't follow every single turn of the screw the way we do. There was a search warrant executed at Mar-a-Lago. What justified that in the eyes of the magistrate judge, Bruce Reinhardt, was an affidavit. Now, there's been a request by media organizations and others to have that affidavit unsealed, a highly unusual circumstance at this stage of any investigation. Nevertheless, a judge has said, the same one, Bruce Reinhardt, that portions of that should be made public. What's your sense of things as they stand right now?
Major, good to be with you. Here's the scene in West Palm Beach, Florida. Judge Reinhardt has announced that a redacted affidavit will be released by noon Friday, and we are all waiting to see what's the extent of the redactions in this document. He's outlined in his order that there will be redactions when it comes to sources and methods and witnesses. There will be redactions when it comes to the strategy of the investigation. So we could be looking potentially at an affidavit that has a lot of black marks on it that doesn't tell us too much. But the scope and length of the affidavit could be interesting for those of us who are following this case. And there might be some more tidbits. Already tidbits have come out about this ongoing federal probe in reporting and letters from the National Archives to the Trump lawyers. This release of a redacted affidavit will be the latest chapter in trying to understand more about the foundational evidence that led to a search warrant of a former president's home just across the water here in Palm Beach, Florida.
And even if it is a heavily redacted document, as you said, there might be some tidbits of information. There might be things that the federal government lets known or to be known or let the judge know as it filed this affidavit. What's your gut sense, Bob, of what we're going to see here? Something that is large and juicy or small and incremental?
My sense, based on reading Judge Reinhardt's order a few days ago, demanding that the government produce their suggested redactions to this affidavit, is that this is a judge who wants something to be made public. He has noted that this is a historic situation, an unusual situation. He knows that affidavits are rarely, if ever, released at this point in an ongoing investigation. But because of high public interest in having a former president's home searched, he would like to see something out there. And so he put it on the government to come up with some ideas that wouldn't hurt their investigation in any way, but would still provide the public with a little bit more understanding. And so my sense is we could learn more about what's already been released from National Archives documents. We have known in the National Archives letters to the Trump lawyers that have been released that there was top secret material, classified material, that there was references to potential so-called special access programs, very sensitive intelligence, national security matters in these boxes that former President Trump brought with him from the White House residence down to his Florida estate after he left the White House. And so because of that knowledge about the investigation already being in the public domain, the Justice Department and the judge, in a collaboration in this decision here, could allow some of that to come out from the affidavit.
And Robert, one of the things that was said early on was this might have been a misunderstanding, that the former president was cooperative. But it seems to me, in my reading, that the body of evidence that has emerged, either from the National Archives or other reporting, yours and other journalists on this story, is that it's harder and harder to make a case that this was a misunderstanding or that the former president and his legal team were fully cooperative. Clearly, there was some substantive disagreement about the misunderstanding, the level of cooperation, and the Justice Department felt the FBI had to be brought in, and they brought that explanation and history through an affidavit to Bruce Reinhart, this U.S. magistrate judge, and that's how we got to where we are. Fair assessment?
We're looking at a situation here, Major, where we cannot yet read what the intent was of former President Trump because we don't have all the documentation or the depositions from witnesses that the Justice Department has on its hands. As reporters, I often say we regretfully at times only carry notebooks and cameras and pens. We don't carry subpoenas with us. The Justice Department has that advantage when it conducts its own investigations. And so we're at a crossroads here where we're going to learn more from the affidavit, but it will ultimately be up to the court to decide, and a jury potentially, if this ever goes to trial, if it ever leads to an indictment, to decide whether former President Trump had criminal intent when he took boxes from his White House residence to his Florida estate without giving them to the National Archives for processing. Whether this rises ever to the level of an indictment, whether this ever rises to the level of a trial, we're nowhere near that at this point based on our understanding of this case. What we do know is that it's a very serious matter based on what the National Archives has outlined to Trump lawyers. This was classified information, highly classified information in their view. And they also believe that former President Trump made a decision to hold on to it for a certain period of time, knowing that Pat Cipollone and others were told in the White House counsel's office to make sure it was processed by the National Archives. It's a complicated story, a lot of different paths to follow here, but we're trying to follow them all as this investigation continues to gain new information, all while other investigations are gaining traction in their own respective ways, whether it's the investigation of Trump's conduct in Georgia in the Fulton County grand jury investigation, or up in New York with the various investigations there, or on Capitol Hill.
And Robert, real quick, you talked to the Trump legal team. I talked to the Trump legal team. Would you say in the intervening 3 or 4 days, or maybe the last week, their level of anxiety has shifted at all?
There's a sense in Trump's inner circle, both his legal team, based on my reporting, I'm sure your reporting may back this up, that the former president was not acting in a criminal way when he took boxes to Florida. But as I said, we don't have the full scope of information about how he made that decision, who told him what to do and what not to do, and whether he knowingly acted against that counsel. And if he did act against counsel, whether that rises to the threshold of a crime being committed. But this is a federal investigation. This is not some kind of probe from the press. This is not some kind of question. This is an ongoing federal investigation dealing with a sealed affidavit, redactions being discussed with a federal judge. An FBI search was conducted. Federal agents had been to Mar-a-Lago before the search. So at this point, I hate to predict anything because we're just learning almost hour by hour a little bit more about how this case came together.
Robert Costa with us. Thanks so very much.
Thank you.